welcome back. Nice to have you here. So fellas, we maybe sort of, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes of presentation, then leave a bit of space for us to have some Q&A with you. Is that all right?
Yeah, sounds perfect.
Fabulous.
So link the talks together so it's one talk, and I think 20 minutes will be right actually. So I'll just share my screen.
Thanks very much indeed.
Is that sharing?
Yep, that's coming up. Looks great.
Okay. And is it? Oh no, I'll put it on full screen.
Put it presenter, and then we'll have that.
That's still
there. That's
it.
Yeah, we got it.
Okay. Right, just give me a second. So yeah, I'm Andy Clegg. I'm Professor of Geriatric Medicine at Leeds University, and I work as a geriatrician at Bradford Teaching Hospitals, which is where both me and Ollie are now. And I also sit on the Dunhill Medical Trust Research Grants Committee. I mean, I've had a long-standing link with Dunhill, actually. So Dunhill funded my original doctoral research fellowship, and I've sat on the Research Grants Committee now for, I think, about 4 years. And I also sit on other research grants committee panels, MRC and IHR. So a reasonable amount of insight into the kind of into the process of developing and assessing research grants. Do you want to just say a quick hello, Ollie, and then?
Oh yeah, hi, I'm Ollie. I'm a lecturer in geriatric medicine. Also got funded by Dunhill for my PhD.
So we're gonna do a bit of a double act. So I'm going to talk mainly about, from experiences, just some general tips for developing a strong application, and then Ollie's going to talk a little bit more specifically about patient and public involvement and engagement activities. So they should hopefully link together well, the two talks. So just in general, I mean, it's quite general, relatively concise tips that are from me, just 6 general tips that hopefully will be helpful for people. And some of them may seem self-evident, but it's surprising how often you come across applications where they don't actually do the things that I'm going to talk about. So the first, and it seems obvious, the first thing to do is to make sure that the application that you're developing aligns with the available guidance. And I think, well, obviously, by the fact that it's people that are joining this sort of meeting today, that suggests to me that it's going to be people that are likely to look to closely align their application with the guidance. But there's a lot on the Dunhill website and a lot of really fantastic resources, actually. So just aligning, obviously, with the specification for the call around hearing and vision, obviously, but then around these key areas: prediction and or diagnosis, prevention and or treatment, improving psychological well-being, or ability to carry out activities of daily living, and then a focus, obviously, alongside that on reducing inequities, a big, important area across all the research funders, actually, reducing inequities in diagnosis, treatment, and or access to care and support. But then alongside that, there's a link on the Dunhill website, and this may have been signposted earlier, the overall strategic framework, which is a fantastic document to read, I think, in general, but really sets out the priorities for Dunhill. And it's important to be familiar with that, so that you can make sure that the application you're developing aligns with the priorities for the trust. So it seems self-evident, but it is surprising how often people don't do this, actually. So that's the first tip. And then I think what was just mentioned, actually, I know some of the people on the call, I suspect, are people who are very well established with aging-related research, but some people might be more from the area of, say, hearing or vision condition-specific research. And it's important, this comes up quite a lot, actually, that the applications that people are developing need to be looked at through a gerontological lens. And in a way, that's trying to consider what's important for older people who might be living with multiple long-term conditions, frailty, impairments in the activities of daily living, cognitive impairment, dementia, rather than just what might be important to what are typically younger people or even older people with single condition illness. It's trying to link together, I suppose, the guidance for the call and the strategic priorities for the Dunhill Trust with the application. And so, for example, from the work that we've done, many older people would probably prioritise the sorts of technologies that sustain overall independence in later life, just as an example of looking at research through the lens of gerontology, as opposed to, say, more condition-specific outcomes. So specifically vision or hearing-related outcomes that are obviously important, but for an older person, that's something within the sort of broader realm of what's important to them, what can help them sustain their independence in later life. So it's trying to ensure that that's embedded throughout the application, that link to what's important to older people living often with multiple long-term conditions, frailty, disabilities, cognitive impairment, dementia, that sort of approach to developing an application. And then to do that, Oly's going to talk about this a little bit more. To do that, you have to really engage meaningfully with older people who have lived experience of, well, for this particular call, of hearing or vision impairments, but also experience of living with often multiple long-term conditions, living with other conditions like frailty or dementia, and also having carer responsibilities. So the impact of sort of condition-specific impairments on their wider role in life and their wider roles and activities in society. And that needs to be really, I mean, that's so crucial to inform application development and also application and research project delivery. And it's really crucial that this is done, and Oly will talk about this more, but from my perspective, that this is done early on and done in a way that ensures that you get engagement across different members of society. So ensuring that it's people from all walks of life that contribute to application development and delivery. And it's really evident when this isn't done well. Actually, you can tell from an application where it's been kind of a late thought to involve older people in the application, and then maybe say sort of the application's been presented to a single older person who said that they agree with all the research questions and the lines of travel throughout the research application. It's quite evident when you're reviewing an application or as part of the panel when that happens. So doing it early and doing it widely with older people is important. And that often actually does mean having the structures, the patient and public involvement and engagement structures set up for quite some time, actually. So not just setting them up for the purposes of this application. It's the sort of thing that you should really be looking to do to set up for the longer term. And I know that many people will have done this, but it's, again, something that you see quite commonly in applications that comes up. And you can see quite quickly when it's not been done appropriately. And then next to that, it kind of links in really. It's crucial that there's detail provided on strategies to ensure that equality, diversity and inclusion is considered throughout the application. And it's important that, well, seldom heard voices are considered proactively, but proactively throughout the application. And this extends beyond just the patient in public involvement and engagement, where it's important to make sure that you have diverse voices feeding into an application. But it's important that you consider how you're going to engage people from different walks of life throughout the research project, and actually link to that as part of building the research team. And it's important to provide this. This is something that comes up quite often as well, actually. So it's quite common that people say what they're going to do. So something like, we will ensure that we have a diverse population or diverse PPI as part of the application. But it's less common to see detail on how people are going to do this. And as soon as people give you detail on how they're going to do this, you can be reassured that it will actually happen. And you can see when people have the structures in place to be able to deliver equality, diversity and inclusion throughout the application. Oly will maybe talk a little bit more about this as well, but you can see it when people have the structures in place to do this. And I say it links to the research team. Just a simple example, if in an application you're talking about how you're going to ensure that you engage with people from different communities and maybe people who don't have English as a first language, it's important to then consider, well, how are you actually going to implement that? And whether you have, say, people in the research team or proactively looking to engage researchers who have, say, community language skills to be able to deliver research that engages appropriately with people across communities. Another really crucial aspect that you see can sometimes be underspecified in an application. I mean, all these areas that I've set out are crucial, but ultimately every single application will stand or fall on the quality of the science. I mean, that goes without saying. and you absolutely must include sufficient detail on the scientific methods for the application to be fully assessed. And again, it's quite common that that doesn't happen. Actually, you get a lot of detail often on the background and setting the case, which is important. I absolutely get this, and I understand myself how hard it is to write a concise application. But you often see either that an application's been poorly structured, so it's hard to follow the flow of the application. And so for that, I always recommend trying to link it to a recognised reporting framework for structuring your scientific methods. But linked to that, the big area that I sometimes struggle with is the analysis plan, both for quantitative and qualitative research, because this is absolutely crucial to actually assessing the overall application. And often the level of detail provided in an analysis plan, whether that's quantitative or qualitative, I think can be lacking in the level of detail that is needed for either an external reviewer or a panel member to be able to fully assess the quality, the methodological quality of an application. And that's sometimes, I think, where people can fall down, having a lack of detail specified in the analysis plan. This is something that comes up, I think, quite frequently. And then again, linked to this, and this is something that I often personally focus on across all the research panels that I sit on. I mean, I've set this out for quantitative research, but I'll link it to the qualitative work as well. The sample size calculation, because a well-specified sample size calculation for a project demonstrates that the applicant understands the link between the research design and the statistical analysis, because your sample size is directly informed by your choice of statistical analysis. They go together hand in hand, and you can really see sometimes when people either they set out a sample size that doesn't link in any way to either an underspecified or an unclear statistical analysis plan. And what sometimes happens, and I understand the difficulties here sometimes with applications, is you do get the sense sometimes through a lack of detail that's been provided, that a sample size has been fitted to the available research funding. And I think sometimes it's preferable to be upfront and to set out feasibility work, if that is realistically what can be delivered within a particular research budget. I think that's perfectly legitimate to do, and I think is a preferable approach. I mean, I probably sit more on the quantitative side in terms of my methodological expertise, which kind of spans quite a range of areas, actually, method spanning clinical trials and routine data research, applied epidemiology. But a lot of the research that we do is mixed methods, and you also do see sometimes when there are difficulties with the sampling frame for qualitative research. So people have set out a sampling framework that just has too many elements for say the number of participants somebody's setting out to recruit. So that does link through to the qualitative research as well. So happy to answer any questions when it comes to the questions. I mean, that's all I wanted to say at this point. I'll probably hand it over to Ollie, who's going to talk a bit more about the PPI element specifically. Oh, no, not finished. One thing I always say as part of our applicants, you have to make it bulletproof. Applications often fall down on sometimes quite a small hole in an application that people pick up on and then start to unpick the application because of that. So you have to think about your application and making it absolutely bulletproof for reviewers. Sometimes it's helpful to get an external view on things. So that's quite a useful way to think about how to construct your applications, and just some overall thinking about how you might want to make sure that it's as tight as possible before you submit the application. But I now will actually hand over to Ollie.
Well, thanks very much. I just got some reflections here from working in our unit where I think patient involvement is championed, or the involvement of older people. And I would like to give an example. So I'll just set out the definition of PPIE, as I'm sure you're all familiar with. Some principles and tips I've brought together from our group about how to involve older people, particularly in PPIE, and then an example. So PPI defined by NIHR Involve guidance, which I'd strongly commend to you if you've not looked at it already, simply says that it describes research that's carried with or by members of the public rather than to or about or for them. And it can occur and should occur at any stage of of the research cycle. So in identifying and prioritizing the original research question, ideally that would be done with patients and carers. Or it may refer to, for example, the James Lind Alliance, who've undertaken a process of identifying what are priorities for these groups. At the design stage, it may involve a patient story as the background, and at its least involve patient representatives in the development of the plain English summary. But it may also involve co-development of any resource or communication aids that are developed from the research. And then in the undertaking of research, PPI representation at the project steering committee level, with involvement of those same communities in the dissemination of findings. So it's useful, I think, to think about PPI involvement at each of these stages. Particularly considerations in older people, who to approach. Well, I think, as mentioned, it depends on the research question who are relevant risk groups, and that may inform your choices, but particularly considering equality and diversity inclusion, to approach groups where that condition may be more common or there are neglected voices. I think there's a consideration whether using established PPIE within a unit or to develop novel voices, so to help harness and bring in people who are not necessarily established PPI experts. But there are advantages and disadvantages to both people who are new to PPIE and people who have some experience in it. I'd strongly recommend purposefully or actively recruiting people from groups. So that may mean going to a local community group, engaging with community champions, rather than expecting people to respond to maybe an open advert. And charities can help in that pursuit. Where PPI happens is important, so setting it close to someone's own home, not making it intimidating. But for other people, a central setting may be more useful where there's access to amenities and good transport links. I think sometimes individuals going to an individual one-to-one may be more appropriate than involving a group, particularly when there may be language barriers for involvement of particular individuals. And consider incentives. That may be financial, and indeed NIHR give guidance, and that cost shouldn't be just minimal. So if it's a large amount of money, for example, £1 million, the proportion that's people often look at the proportion of that funding that goes to PPIE, and it shouldn't be minimal or too modest. But there may be other incentives, social, so involving community champions in your work, status or training, so people, and that should probably be tailored to the individual. How to run PPIE? Well, I've put refreshments here, and I think scones and probably plain sandwiches have worked well. Ham or cheese, not too fancy. But on a serious point, I think involving experts who do PPIE and have expertise in this has helped me hugely. Giving time for people to develop rapport, whether that's to tell their story about who they are and to build up relations with the other members, has made it enjoyable, so fun for those people to be involved and want to come back and take part in your research in the future. And to allow time for people to debrief, to talk either side. And people will come early, I found, often an hour and a half or earlier than the time said, so prepare for that. I find it useful to spell out ground rules, that we don't talk over each other, that things are kept confidential, and that what we're going to do with the information, as well as obviously ensuring consent. It's useful to assign a scribe role or involve transcription, and give feedback after. Communication, I think, needs variable formats, phone calls before the event, anticipating taxis, transport, and the provision of toilets and what we have available to make sure that people feel comfortable in this space, and writing to people in post as well as to connect with them in person, maybe individually before and after. And considering the roles of older people to make them empowered in this in this platform may need that they can bring a carer or a family member alongside. And those concerns will be more real to you with this call than maybe I've allowed in these slides. These are just some considerations for plain English summaries. How many people did you engage with? What did you ask of them? How many gave feedback? How many wanted to be involved, and what did they think about the topic? I just want to give briefly an example of my own work where these have been considerations. So I've looked at whether ambulatory blood pressure can reduce falls in older adults, a very different theme to that discussed today. But at every stage of this, I've involved patients and their carers at the heart of this proposal. So it addresses key priorities identified by the James Lind Alliance. In the design, I've involved communities. I've gone to communities in Bradford where I know that hypertension is more common. So I've approached the women from the Dominica Association and Asian men in the Carman community in Bradford. I've set up a hypertension and aging research panel who will form part of the project management group. And I've approached the STARS charity, which is a charity which represents a high-risk group for falls, who have agreed to platform the resources and videos I develop in this proposal. And in response to some of the concerns of the PPI members, I've, alongside a big data piece of work in Work Package 1, I've given an equal footing to Work Package 2, which involves co-development to ensure good communication of these resources for patients, carers and their clinicians. This is just some examples of the feedback that I gave back to the community after involvement. So I found that they said that the theme that I'd broached was felt to be interesting and important, very relevant to me. There was an awareness in this group that blood pressure can go very high and very low, and they were interested how frequently blood pressure should be measured. There was interest in the group about the potential role of technology, if that output, so if the technology could be understood by lay people. And it was a learning for me that a lot of the knowledge of people's knowledge of hypertension came from their community peers rather than clinicians or charities. And for a lot of people in the group, hypertension management was delegated to sons or daughters. I changed my design to include co-production as an equal part of the fellowship. I engaged members with diverse backgrounds, ethnic and socioeconomic, in the interpretation and translation of the findings in Work Package 1. And for those of members who didn't have PPIE experience, that necessitated collaborating with expertise in citizen science. I also included in the costings personalised coaching and training and funding for translation where people's first language was not English or they did not speak English at all. And I also plan to involve carers and family members as stakeholders. So overall, tips to do PPI early and throughout, to involve experts in PPIE. I would recommend getting an independent review of costs, and some charities are particularly good at doing that and looking at what realistically are appropriate costs for involving PPI, often higher than may have been traditionally incorporated, and to actively seek more diverse input. So thanks very much. That brings me to an end.
Oly, thank you very much indeed. Andy, thank you very much indeed. Very useful tips and insights there. Just going to open the floor now for a short moment to see if there are any sort of questions from our audience here about what you've just presented. Hands up, digitally or physically, wave at us.
I could maybe ask a question, but maybe it's semi-related to the question about reviewers we had earlier. So Andy, given that you're on the Research Grants Committee, can you sort of give everyone a bit of an insight and sort of the culture or, you know, for want of a better word, the vibe of the Research Grants Committee meeting when we come to assess applications, so that people get an understanding of the supportive nature of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have to say, I do think it's a really, really fantastic committee, actually, the RGC at Dunhill, really diverse expertise. And that's been commented on, actually, at previous meetings from people who have joined the meeting for the kind of specialist calls, hasn't it, Sanjay? I think, and people, I think, do recognise the expertise of the panel, and I think it's a great group. And so, what tends to happen is the applications will be assessed by usually 2 to 3 peer reviewers, and then each panel member will be allocated 2 to 3 that you'll be the kind of primary introducer for, and 2 to 3 that you'll be the sort of secondary introducer for, usually something like that. And then you've spent time yourself reviewing the applications, particularly that you're the main introducer for, but also the other applications that are submitted, actually. So it's can be quite a large undertaking, actually. And you'll have reviewed the external reviewer comments, and we do see, because I know the feeling as an applicant. I mean, and you do sometimes feel that, say, a peer reviewer may have been slightly harsh on some aspects of the application. I think that we generally pick up on that on the committee, actually. We see if there's comments from a reviewer that are either they've missed the point or they've just missed a part of the application. I think we generally pick that up, actually. And we can account for that, I think. So it's just something for you to be aware of. And we have a general open discussion about the applications one at a time, and allocate, I think, sufficient time to give them the amount of time that they deserve, because again, I know how much time it goes into putting in this sort of application, and it's a tough process. I mean, it's hard. We get a lot of very strong applications, and we need to prioritize them within a restricted budget ultimately. So we need to make some pretty tough decisions, and applications sometimes that don't get funded are still strong applications. And it's kind of, I mean, we know the game that we're in, and that's part of the process. So we'd often, it's usually up to 20 to 30 applications, Sanjay, is that about right? And we'd usually fund 5 or 6, something like that. So that's the sort of success rate. It's a high bar, but I do think it's a very experienced committee, a very fair committee, as you'd expect, and we do give all the applications the time of consideration that they deserve, just to make that really clear to people.
Thank you, Andy. And I don't want to put, while we're waiting for maybe some additional questions from people, I don't want to put Oly on the spot. How has it been being funded by us? So what's that experience like with your research training fellowship?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, well, it's been a huge privilege, really, and being part of a community. It certainly felt part of a community at Dunhill, with being invited to the events and managing, therefore, to develop new collaborations within that community. So it's been a very, very supportive and positive experience.
And in terms of sort of the mechanics of the administration of the award, what kind of things do you think people who are applying could expect if they're successful?
Right, well, there's a degree to which you're reporting back to Dunhill regularly about the progress of your work, but my own work was also during the COVID period, and there was a lot of understanding for the difficulties faced, and actually my research time was extended during that time very easily with a lot of understanding. So yeah, some degree of reporting back, which I think is as much as a process of checking in. And whenever I've got outputs with, I think Dunhill have helped shared, communicate and disseminate those outputs.
No, that's great. Just it's always nice to sort of, we're always talking about, say, the application end, so it's quite nice to sort of give people a bit of an insight into what to expect if funded. I'll hand over to Tim.
Thank you. Are there any other questions that we would like to ask of Oly or Andy? And again, I'm assuming that Andy, Oly, you're available via email if anybody needed you or had any questions.
So we have
the
slides.
Yeah, if people are prepared to wait slightly for a response sometimes. Sanjay.
Okay.
we can always be the mediator. So you can
very happy to. If there's specific things, I'm sure we're all very happy to.
Thank you. And I see there's a question from Chris in the chat there. Is it expected that the application will have already gone through PPIE review before submission? And how might we evidence that? Or is this something that we can be built into the project? I guess that might be, is that to Andy or is that to Sanjay, Oly?
Maybe we can, well, I mean, I personally would expect that an application would have some form of PPIE input into the development. So from that perspective, that would be what I would expect as the start of before a submission. I mean, it needs to be done in partnership with patients and the public. So the application really needs to be developed with people, and then that needs to be evidenced in the application. As Oly said, it kind of needs to be set out with detail, I think. So the people that have been involved in the process, the people that you've engaged with. I mean, but absolutely, it still can be built and should be built into the project. It should be a continuous process throughout the project. It's kind of that initial input to sort of set out the research questions, refine the research questions, and then feed into the overall approach. That's what I think needs to be done at an early stage and should be done before the application is submitted. I think if somebody submitted an application and said, we've had sort of no PPI involvement to this point, and we're going to do it all in the application, that would be a bit of a red flag to me.
And I guess, like Oly mentioned, there are James Lind Alliance priority setting partnerships, which will be able to couch your research question within a priority of what people, healthcare professionals and people have felt are priorities in their area. So always linking it back to need, unmet need, various groups, and as Andy mentioned, older people. What are the sort of, what is the lens by which that application you're submitting is related to older people?
I think there's recognition now as well with funding that, for example, my work was funded by a research development fund from the university, which is purely for ensuring that you do get meaningful PPI input before submitting a bid, because it can cost a couple of £100 to organise these events.
Thank you. There's another question here from David. Can Andy provide some evidence on striking the right balance of making sure there's sufficient detail across all required aspects of the application, e.g. background, PPI, stats plan, etc., given the strict word limits?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's hard to do. I mean, so the application form for the main full application for Dunhill, there is a separate section that specifies methods, and I think it says specifically statistical analysis or analysis plan. And what you often, or what you sometimes see, is people start to merge some of the kind of backgrounds or re-describe some of the background in that section, and then they set out a lot for the kind of methods in terms of, well, the eligible participants, the recruitment methods, and I mean, you need to obviously list, if it's quantitative work, the outcomes of interest, but they need to be listed as outcomes, not long sentences describing them, I don't think. And then, like I said before, then you often get to the end of it and there's maybe one sentence on the statistical analysis plan or the qualitative analysis plan. And it's like, well, that is nowhere near enough, I don't think, for somebody to be able to assess if an application is credible. You just can't realistically assess the application in the rounds. I get that it's difficult. And I mean, like I said before, the other big problem is the structure. And when you get an application where it's just an unstructured list of text without any subheadings, without any breaks between paragraphs, it's just, I mean, you can picture it. If you're trying to review 30 applications before Research Grants Committee meeting, and you've got applications that are just difficult to read, it's hard, and you then find yourself getting lost in the application just because of the way that it's structured. You can have the best sort of science in the world, but if you don't communicate it to the people that are going to be reviewing it, that's where people can fall down. So other than that, I don't know, it's probably hard to say more than that. I mean, it comes with experience and involving people who have done this a lot in the process, actually. So just knowing where to provide more emphasis, actually engaging people with a lot of experience in this for external review can be useful as well.
Andy, we have another. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just looking at the other questions. Expect PPIE.
Oh, well done. Yeah.
Yeah, expression of interest. I don't know, Sanjay, you might want to say with the
yeah, I was actually going to I was going to cover that one.
Yeah,
so that's an internal triage process. So it's a principles-based assessment by the team within, so it's our strategic principles. So we're assessing the first round of stage 1. And so that's our principles around equity, diversity, inclusion, capacity building, and patient care and public involvement and engagement. So just to give you a sort of idea of what we're hoping for is an excellent and cleared and detailed and compelling demonstration of how patient care and public involvement has been or will be considered in developing the proposal, and how those PPI principles will be actively engaged going forward. So touching on what Andy had mentioned before, are there specific and relevant actions and mechanisms to which you are going to embed patient care and public involvement into the proposed research, or have already done so? And are those plans clearly resourced and credible? So those are the sort of things we're going to be looking at the expression of interest stage for all our principles. So, you know, as Andy had said, it's like the how, not the what. How are you going to embed these principles in your work? And again, in the news section of our website, you can see feedback that we have given to previous expression of interest stages, where we have shown how we have given feedback relating to our principles. So, and I guess, Andy, there's another question there for you around PPI. So it's okay, I'll hand over back to you.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So tips to manage the process of feedback. Yeah, it's a good question, actually. Yeah, I suppose, I mean, it's probably partly expectation management from the outset. I mean, we all know the game that we're in, and I think if it's people who have been involved in, say, research before, they'll understand the process, and they'll understand that there is a chance that the application won't be successful. From my experience, I mean, people are obviously disappointed, but I've not tended to find any more disappointed than the other academic members of the team. And people sometimes come from backgrounds where they themselves will have experience through, say, their working life of doing similar things. They'll have put in applications for things that haven't come off. And I think people in life are you get used to this sort of process through one way or another. So I've not found it to be a major issue. I think it can be helpful because it often is an area that the patient and public members are obviously passionate about, and I think that can then sometimes help you push on through the disappointment yourself, actually, and sort of think about, well, actually, yeah, can we move this on? Can we think about how we can further develop the application in another way? Are there other opportunities for us to look at? Might we be able to do some initial small scale work, looking at a different funding pot? That's the sort of thing that I think they can sometimes be helpful in sort of continuing to push you forwards, actually. And then also, I think just having the idea of setting it up as a kind of a long-term partnership, I think, can be useful. They're the structures that we've tried to set up over time, just having PPI structures in place that are for the long term, and people get familiar with the process. And alongside that, I think it's I don't know, I can't remember if Dunhill mandates it, actually, Sanjay, but having a PPI co-applicant within the application, I think is a useful thing to do, because then they are truly part of the process, actually, and they're part of the team. I think that's a very sensible thing to do.
Yeah, not mandated, but obviously, like you say, very, very useful. And a quick question there about, do we use members of the public to review the proposal? As Andy outlined in the review processes, we don't, but we do include experts in different aspects of research, say, be it equity, diversity and inclusion, or patient care and public involvement within the panels and the review process. As the other Oly, our Oly, mentioned, we're a small team. So there's actually 3 members of the grants team all in this call, and we help administrate the entire portfolio. And in the organization as a whole, there's 6 people. So we don't have the resource to meaningfully include members of the public within our reviewing of proposals, but we do understand the absolute value of it.
I'm conscious of time. I see, did we answer Nikki's question about, we just got about a minute left here now, overseas researchers experts, and there's also the question about example of successful applications, just in 30 seconds.
Yeah, I can cover that. Yes, co-applicants can include overseas researchers and experts to capture their expertise, and examples of successful applications can be found on our news website as well. So if Gordon could maybe quickly push one of those across from a previous call, I think maybe suitable living environments might be a good example, or the aging immune system. So some of the previous themed calls we have run.
Fabulous. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Oly, for those insights and answering questions. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. We are at 11:30, so I think a quick break is due for everybody.